How can trade bring about sustainable good? Welcome to Women of Worth. I'm Michelle Martin. Today, a very special privilege. We're chatting with Arancha Gonzalez, the Executive Director of the International Trade Center. That's a joint agency of the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development and the World Trade Organization. We're going to find out how trade and international business development can benefit communities, and women in particular. Arancha, welcome to the program.
Hi, delighted to be with you, Michelle.
Thank you for joining us. You spent so much of your career working with organizations that promote free trade, including 8 years with the World Trade Organization and as a trade negotiator for the European Commission. At the ITC, the International Trade Center, you're helping spearhead poverty-fighting programs, like one that empowers women through fashion and another that helps businesses run by youth. So we're going to find out about those initiatives in just a minute. But first, how do you think we can ensure that the global economy is based on ethical trade or fair trade and not just free trade?
Well, first, I don't like to talk about free trade. I like to talk about open trade. Trade is never totally free. We don't want to have trade on, for example, dangerous substances or toxic products. We want open trade. Why? Because it's about efficiency. It's about making sure we enlarge the size of the cake. But we also want to do this in an ethical manner, in a fair manner, meaning respecting people, respecting their labor rights, respecting their working conditions, and very importantly, making sure that our trade patterns are sustainable. We have to care about the environment we live in. We have to care about the climate we live in. It's especially now as we have a major international conference going on at the same time as we speak in Peru, we have to make sure that trade practices are made compatible with our condition of human beings living in a planet which is not unlimited and which we have to give back to the future generations.
Now, the world's best-known framework for fighting poverty and promoting development, the Millennium Development Goals, expire at the end of next year, and governments, including Singapore, are in the process of negotiating a new post-2015 agenda, likely called the Sustainable Development Goals. Now, I read in a speech that you gave to some students in Geneva last week that you said that economic growth needs to be integrated into the Sustainable Development Goals, along with social pillars like ending hunger and quality education. But many anti-poverty campaigners argue that the current economic system is the problem, not the solution, and they point out that economic growth is not enough. And there are plenty of examples of countries that have good economic growth rates but widening inequality and persistent poverty. So how would you respond to this critique?
I totally agree with this. Growth is only half of the story, but it's the half that we also have to care about, because without growth, there is going to be little to distribute. So first, we have to make sure there is growth. We have to make sure that we keep increasing the size of the cake, if I want to use the metaphor of baking a cake. But then we have to make sure that the cake is distributed in a bit of a fairer way among all citizens. We cannot have, 10% of the citizens eating 90% of the cake, and the remainder of the 10% of the cake being eaten by the rest, the 90% of humanity. So now, the problem is that trade is about growth, but trade is not necessarily about the distribution. The distribution has to do with other policies than trade. It's got to do with education. It has to do with welfare. It has to do with taxation. And all of this is what governments have in their hand, and that they must work together with opening trade if they want trade to translate into impact for good.
Right, so there needs to be political will as well. In what ways does the ITC look at value chains of production from a gendered perspective? And can you share with us a little bit about how this perspective has benefited communities and economies?
Well, first, to say that value chains are the form that trade takes today in the 21st century. It's no longer about one country fully manufacturing a product or fully delivering a service, but rather those products or those services being produced or delivered out of components coming from different countries. So the question today for every country is, how do I add value to the inputs that I have? How can I move up the value chain? But being clear that it is being part of these value chains. Now, for us, value chains are very powerful tools to foster development and to make sure this development is more inclusive. But for that, the first thing we would do is first try to understand how those value chains work. First is get the right diagnosis. Ask yourself the right questions. For example, we have worked in yam production in Kenya. Yam is a root that is used a lot in feeding, especially feeding of animals, but also as an ingredient in food for humans. We know that 90% of yam production is done by men, and women are not participating in yam production. Why is that? Well, because women don't have access to land resources, whereas women are only in the distribution and in the trading of the yam. So if we want to understand, if we want to shape value chains in a manner that are more responsive to men and women alike, then we have to understand how those value chains are functioning. Now, once we have understood, once we have made the right diagnosis, then we have to ensure we design the right interventions to address the issues that value chain may present. What are these issues? Sometimes it's about skills. Do women have the necessary skills to move up the value chain, or are they condemned to forever work on the lowest part of the value chain, the one that adds less value and therefore the one that bears less remuneration? Sometimes it's about technology. Do the women have access to technology, which is very much linked to often education and financing?
Right.
Women find it in many countries of this planet very difficult to access financing. Why? Because very often they don't have any collateral to offer. They don't have the right to inherit the land. They don't have the right to possess the land. Just think what impact this has. If you don't have land, you don't have a collateral, you cannot go to a bank and ask for credit. So financing is a huge issue in the case of women if we talk about their ability to move up the value chain. And finally, I would say in the case of value chains, big issue is connecting women entrepreneurs to markets. We have seen ourselves the value of making sure these women are connected to buyers internationally who are going to embed them into their value chains and through that allow them to move up, capture a greater part of the value.
Ms. Arancha, have you worked in areas where there is a struggle even to include women in terms of the right to work, and how do you overcome these very perhaps situational challenges?
Well, it starts, in my case, it always starts with explaining to everybody that the issue of including women in our economy is not just an ideological choice. It's not a moral choice. It's not a social choice. It's not just that. It's a huge economic responsibility. Just like you don't fly a plane with just one engine, you cannot drive an economy with switching off 50% of this economy that is represented by women. So I cannot understand today how any government could forego growth by excluding 50% of their economic force from the labor market. So my first pitch to anyone that has doubt about women participation in the economy is always to go back to numbers. Always go back to the facts and the figures. You see, Michelle, women reinvest 90% of their revenues in their families and their communities. This is compared to 40% in the case of men. Now, this is not me saying it. This is the World Bank research, just in case there is any doubt. Anyone in the audience thinking, oh, well, she's a woman, so she's just saying that because she's a woman.
And this is the business case for female entrepreneurs and their contribution in developing economies or developed?
It's everywhere the same, in the north and in the south, in the east and in the west.
Women just give back to the economies more.
That's right. And therefore, they are amazing vectors for inclusive development, for making sure that the wealth is better distributed. So if you want your economy to be fully functioning, and if you want your growth to be more inclusive, and better distributed, then you have you must make sure that women are part of the economic landscape. So I always start with these very sobering facts, because I find it easier to reach out universally to any country around the world through this economic lens than just starting the discussion from an ideological, social, or moral. I find it myself, being a woman, I find it terribly distressing that at times we have to explain that.
Yes.
But since we are living in this world, we have to be pragmatic. Let's explain that, but let's explain with the facts and the figures. I, again, don't see any government in a position to forego growth and to forego inclusive growth these days, frankly speaking.
The ITC has been in service for 50 years, helping to transform trade opportunities. Has the explanations or the need to reach out to countries and the arguments for sustainable development changed over these 50 years? What are your immediate challenges?
Well, I think I would say that if I look back 50 years ago, this was not even an issue. I mean, people would not even think about this. People would not even talk about this.
You mean women on the agenda?
Absolutely. Absolutely. It was not, the women did not figure in the landscape 50 years ago as an issue in the trade landscape or as an issue in the economic landscape, to be quite honest. Now, what I see now is that the need for making the case, the need to make the case, is probably less prevalent today. I think a lot has changed in particular since the Beijing Plan of Action and since the Millennium Development Goals were launched. I think there is more of a conscious that the issue of gender has to be embedded, included in every one of our policies, starting with economic policies. Now, the question today is more, how do we do that? How can we achieve that?
Yes.
So wherever I travel, a lot of the questions that I get from governments is, okay, so what can I do to make sure that I embed more women into the economy? Give me practical ideas to do that.
We're chatting with Arancha Gonzalez, the Executive Director of the International Trade Center. More from her after this.
Add to your wow factor with Michelle Martin in the Wow Club on 938 Live.
You're listening to Women of Worth. I'm Michelle Martin, and our very special guest this evening is Arancha Gonzalez, the Executive Director of the International Trade Center. We're going to find out more about their work, not only empowering women in the Arab world, we understand. But first, we're moving to Africa. Arancha, I want to ask you a little bit about parts of Africa that are moving to include women in their programs for development. And also, later, we could tackle how important private sector partnerships are in this move to include women in development in parts of Africa.
Perfect.
So, which parts of Africa are moving? Yeah.
Sorry.
Could you share with us a little bit about your work in Africa, moving to include women in programs for development? Specifically, which parts of Africa are coming forward to bring women to the table, so to speak?
We are working virtually all across Africa on including women into value chains and empowering women economically. I like a lot to make sure that we stress the word economically, because we are trying to empower women in many different ways through rights, through laws, through frameworks, but we also have to make sure we empower them with helping them earn a decent income. I see a lot of activity and a lot of progress virtually all across the continent, but I want to talk to you about two countries where a lot is being done. One is Rwanda, the other one is Kenya. In Rwanda, where this issue of promoting gender and gender equality and empowerment of women is taken from politics and policy down to education through to the economy. Something that has tremendously helped in Rwanda, for example, is helping women access credit. You see, one of the things that Rwanda has done is a land registry to make sure every piece of land has an owner and allow women to be owners of land. Two, for the women that cannot still provide guarantees, huge effort has been made at creating guarantee funds to ensure they can also tap into financing. Similarly, the government of Kenya has also worked a lot in empowering women by having them access to credit, a critical component to grow your business and move up the value chain. We are ourselves, as International Trade Center, working a lot with the fashion industry to empower women economically through a program we call ethical fashion.
Yes, I'm very excited to hear about this ethical fashion initiative which connects Africa and Haiti to global markets. Can you share with us how exactly it does this?
Well, it starts from the realization that fashion is a hugely powerful industry from an economic point of view. It moves billions of dollars every year, and therefore it has the power to embed women suppliers into their value chains. Women suppliers that come from many different origins in many different parts of the world, including women in most destitute places of this planet. And these are the women that we want to embed in this value chain through this program called ethical fashion. These are women often living under less than $1 a day. Women that live in slums, women that have difficulties in housing and educating their children and feeding their families, but women who have skills and can improve their skills with the right training, with the right assistance, with the right job. So what we do is work with the fashion industry. The fashion industry makes sure that they provide markets for the products that these women produce, and we take care of making sure the women can produce the products at the level of quality with the rigor that the fashion industry is requiring. We are working at the moment with around 40 big fashion houses all around the world. They are the ones that embed these women into their value chain. They are the ones that bring the women to the market, but they need us because they wouldn't necessarily have as their objective to train the women, to tool the women, to give the women a job is one thing, but to make sure the women are in a position to take that job is precisely what the International Trade Center does with the support, with the generous support from the donor community. So it's a perfect example of marrying the private sector, the donor community, and an international agency in a virtuous circle.
Now, what have some of the challenges of integrating ethics and fashion been for the ITC? You know, perhaps it's because of the media or books like No Logo by Naomi Klein, which generates so much attention to, fashion and unethical practices. So what have the main challenges been for the ITC when you talk about connecting this network of artisans and fashion partners been?
Well, for us, it has been, from the very beginning, it was clear that we would only partner with the private sector, with those that would be ready to join us in a vision which is ethical fashion. Now, what is ethical fashion? It is, one, respect for fair labor conditions. You have to pay workers a decent salary. This is not charity. It's about paying decent salaries. It's about making sure that the working place is a decent working place. Two is making sure you produce according to sustainable methods. So you don't use chemical agents, you don't use toxic ingredients. The three, you also respect artisanal traditions. You use this project to promote artisanal knowledge, know-how, very often in communities that will simply lose it if someone doesn't take care of bringing it to the market. And we have found lots of fashion houses that are very eager to maintain these artisanal traditions. Embroidery from Palestine, wool from Peru, cotton and silk from Ethiopia, fine embroidery from India, beading, leather in many parts of Africa, in Kenya, in Burkina Faso, amazing tissues, weaving. So all these artisanal traditions, you find them all over the world. You just have to make sure that you build a concept and that you build a construct that makes sure the interlocutor is ready to accept. And it's having a very serious discussion with the private sector. The private sector that works with the International Trade Center is private sector committed to respect this charter. 3 points: fair labor conditions, sustainability, and 3, respect for artisanal traditions. It's not impossible. It takes a little bit of a while. At the beginning, companies are saying, well, what is the United Nations doing here? But very quickly they understand that we can be a bridge between poor, destitute communities and international markets, and that they can benefit from this too. So it's a typical example of a win-win. Everybody wins. The fashion houses win because they have unique products that they can sell to their customers. The women that work with us win big time. Big time. Those that were under less than $1 a day are today on $7, $8, even $13 a day. 90% of them have improved housing. 83% have been able to send their kids to school. 95% of them have improved their food, nutrition. So it's a win-win for everybody, but we have to make sure we make it a win-win for everybody because sometimes it doesn't naturally happen.
Yes, it's a tremendous initiative. We also know there's a darker side to fashion, and that perhaps populates the popular imagination of, brands moving to foreign countries or export processing zones which have no labor laws, and that leads to dire working conditions. So how have you been able to ensure that the ITC Ethical Fashion Initiative provides a decent wage for each worker and profits for partners?
Well, it's monitoring, controlling, making sure that people report on what they are doing and making sure that we have visits, that we have on-site visits, and that we have people reporting on what's happening on the ground. I myself went 3 months ago to visit one of these operations in Nairobi, in Kenya. I went to one of the slums in Nairobi called Korokocho. It's a slum where you have more than 5,000 people living in a dump. And there we have units of production that are ethical fashion units of production. And I went there and I sat with the women and I talked to them and I saw where they work and I saw what they are doing. I just went there once, but we have people that are just making sure that whatever we agree to do between the fashion industry and the ITC and these production units is exactly what happens on the ground. Transparency is the biggest disinfectant. So putting light into what is happening down there and reporting on what's happening out there is our method to do that.
They say what you can measure, you can change. So do you think that because there is a standalone goal within the MDGs to support women, that we're going to see the greater realization of women's rights in the future?
I think it's very important that we place women at the heart, like it's very important that we place youth at the heart of the post-2015 agenda. Youth because they are the biggest untapped engine of growth. Women, very often young, because they are a huge conduit for making sure this growth is better distributed in our societies. What I am very eager to see in the post-2015 agenda is a call to make sure we all collect data in a gender disaggregated manner. You see, what happens is that very often I come across lots of interlocutors who tell me, oh, but I don't know because we don't have the figures.
Exactly.
Because we don't have the data.
Yes.
So let's give everybody the data. Let's make sure the data is there so that this big unknown factor that clouds decision-making, which is not having the facts, is on the table. You see, there is Sheryl Sandberg who says, and I love to quote her all the time because I think it's so right, what you don't know, you don't care. But once you know, you cannot but care.
Absolutely.
So data is gender disaggregated data in the post-2015 agenda, please.
Yes, and speaking about data, here in Singapore, the issue of increasing the number or representation of women in leadership is so high on our agenda of women's issues. So women hold 8.3% of directorships on boards of companies listed on the Singapore Exchange or the SGX. Ms. Gonzalez, what, in your opinion, needs to happen to see more women stepping into positions of leadership in a global marketplace?
Well, I think the biggest point we have to push is that whether it is in leadership or in corporations or in public or in private life in general, we need diversity. what makes a corporation stronger, what makes a board stronger, more performant, is diversity. Diversity of perspective, diversity of backgrounds, diversity of skills, and obviously gender diversity is a key component to that. There are a lot of studies that have looked into this matter. They have looked at how companies that have more women on boards have outperformed their rivals in returns on sales, on invested capital, on return on equity. So we have the facts here, but we have to push this concept that having women on boards is not about, charity.
Yes.
Go for merit, but within merit, go for diversity. Let's make sure we have all the voices around the table. I don't know of any human enterprise, whichever it is, public or private, that is going to be very successful if it just simply suppresses the voices that represent the society in which we live. So go for merit, please. Don't lower the bar of merit. I am not suggesting we reduce merit, but within merit, make sure you go for diversity.
Ms. Gonzalez, we started with a discussion on free trade versus ethical trade. So just for the listeners who are joining us now, in the news, we often cover global gatherings and trade agreements. And if two countries sign a bilateral trade deal, it's considered great news. If ASEAN or APEC signs a regional deal, it's reported as even better news. So open economies are supposed to be good for everyone and are cited as ways that have lifted many out of poverty, for example, in India and China. But civil organizations, the groups that work on the ground, are almost all against free trade agreements, saying that they're not actually free, but just a way for the richer companies or countries to impose their terms. For example, we've seen Philip Morris use a treaty to sue Australia over plans to ban logos from cigarette packages. What is your take? Should we be cheering every time a new trade agreement is announced or concerned?
I think you should go and read it first. Don't cheer it. First read it. First make yourself an opinion. I know, frankly, let's go back to basics, facts and figures. I know of no economy that has grown by shutting its borders, by closing its markets, by just simply looking at what it can produce and disregarding the rest of the world. I have seen the best economies perform when they are open. Now, openness doesn't immediately translate into benefits for all everywhere at the same time. Opening sometimes creates competitive pressures, creates competition, and there are winners and there are losers. Societies that work better, economies that work better, are those that combine intelligently openness with better distribution of the benefits of the openness and taking care of those that are left behind.
Yes.
Give them opportunities to re-enter into the economy. So that's my method. I never clap before I have read what these agreements contain. Sometimes, trade negotiators, and I have been one in the past, so I have also committed that sin, like to overplay their results at times and say, only look at the positives and, explain how great this is and how historic that achievement is. Sometimes when you read it after the cameras have been switched off, you realize that it's a bit more modest, but I would say it's maybe a contribution to a more open society, and that I think it is good.
Thank you so much for this conversation. Arancha Gonzalez, ITC's Executive Director. Such a privilege to speak with you. Thank you, Ms. Gonzalez.
Thank you. Thanks to you, Michelle, and look forward to continuing this dialogue.
Absolutely. ITC's Executive Director there, Arancha Gonzalez. You'll be listening to WOW. I'm Michelle Martin.
Add to your wow factor with Michelle Martin in the WOW Club on 938 Live.